Hi folks, this is a video about paper 2 question 2 of the GCSE English language exam. For this video, known as the summary question, I'm going to be using perhaps a better known past paper which is all about Aberfan and London. This, I think, is many years old now. It was released, I think, as an exemplar paper back in, I think it was 2015, 2016 era. So it's been around a while, so you might be familiar with this paper. In this video, I'm going to be going through the process of getting the information you need from the extracts in order to write a response. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to be showing you some example responses which are of varying success in relation to the mark scheme. So this is a comparison question, so no surprises that we need to be able to refer to two sources, both sources, source A and source B. And source A, to save time really, I've just cut away the piece of the extract that we perhaps don't need. This is the beginning of the extract from the 1967 essay, The Village That Lost Its Children by Laurie Lee. For those of you that don't know, Aberfan, as it says there, is a small mining village in Wales. But in 1966, there was a terrible landslide, as you can see in the image there, where coal, mining waste that had been piled on top of a valley, slid down the mountain and destroyed half the village, including the primary school. So it was a terrible tragedy, and I think one of the worst tragedies in the UK in the 20th century. So it's a sombre extract, source A, very emotive, and we are looking to understand what Aberfan is like as a place, as a village. So it says, few people had ever heard of Aberfan until disaster struck it. It was just another of the small mining villages lying tucked away in the South Wales valleys, a huddle of anonymous terraced houses of uniform ugliness, unrelieved except for a chapel and pub. Its heart was the coal pit, and its environment like the others, the debris of a slowly exhausting industry, a disused canal, some decaying rail tracks, a river as black as the Styx, a general coating of grime over roofs and gardens, and the hills above blistered with a century of mining waste. So we have enough information here to be able to answer the question for the summary, which I'll show you in a second. We need to be thinking about what details do we get told about Aberfan. And if you were being asked about how Aberfan is presented here, what would you highlight as the evidence from Lee's essay? Okay, so it's quite a bleak place, as you can tell from the description of it. Because this is a comparison question, we have to obviously refer to source B, and source B is about London, obviously the capital city of Great Britain. This is from the 19th century, from October 1863. Again, to save time, I have just zoomed in to the paragraph really which is most useful for the summary question, because we need to be, as you can see in the box at the bottom there, we need to be looking for details that we learn about London. And again, as before, what would you highlight as evidence? So the writer says, in London we are situated on a deep bed of clay, where our houses are well built, and where we are so accustomed to noises, shocks, and tremors that we are almost startled to find it calm and quiet. Noises from vast warehouses along the riverbanks, bathed by the muddy and dull water of the great river, while trains rush past at full speed or rumble underground, uttering horrible cries and vomiting waves of smoke. London, where men work in darkness, scarcely seeing their own hands and not knowing the meaning of their labour. London, a rainy, colossal city, smelling of molten metal and of soot, ceaselessly streaming and smoking in the night fog. Fog which persists and assumes different hues, sometimes ashen, sometimes black. Within the lighting of the fires, it soon becomes yellow and pungent, irritating the throat and eyes. Okay, so again, we need to be thinking about how is Aberfan presented and how is London presented, and that will give us the source of our comparison. Okay, so obviously this is a video. You can pause this video to write down any evidence that you wish, but let me just show you what the question is. So use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences between Aberfan and London. So it's a relatively simple comparison question, and you can see there from our table that I've already put in some bullet points in terms of why each place is different. So Aberfan is a small village, it's dirty and polluted, and it also has infrastructure that is falling apart, such as the railway track and the canal, which would have been both built, obviously, in the Industrial Revolution to ship goods around the country before we had things like motorways. However, in source B, London is much busier, it's much larger. There are more people, it seems, living in well-built homes there. And it's a place of industry and work on a much larger scale. We're told that the mining industry is dying out in Wales, as it did, but London seems to be a hub of activity, a hive of activity, where work seems to be much more consistent. So this is the 8 marker, this is the 10-minute task. I always say to my students, write one paragraph, it's fine, as long as you're making that comparison and as long as you are summarising or explaining to the examiner why the two places are different. With this question, our summary, our explanation, needs to be rooted within the evidence of the text. So you can see here, for every single point that I have made in black, I have given a piece of evidence in quote marks to show that my summary is in fact being informed by what I read. And this is why in English a highlighter is often your friend. So the idea would be that I would quote some of these in my answer to show that I can use evidence and make inferences and interpretations based on that evidence. Okay. So just remind you that inference is being able to make an interpretation for yourself based on the evidence that the writer gives you. So in other words, the writer will only tell you so much, but we can infer meaning for ourselves using words like suggesting, implying and inferring, which I always find act as a useful prompt in order for students to give their own insight. So I'm going to finish this video then by showing you a selection of, I think, 3 examples from different parts of the mark scheme. This is an example of a more simplistic response. The student says, source A says that Aberfan is dirty and a place where mining took place, but source B is about the capital city of England. Source A is quiet and abandoned, but London is very busy and full of people. That would get you some marks. It might get you 1 or 2 out of 8, so it will give you something. But of course, if you are aiming to get a higher grade, as in a grade 4 or above, then you would need to be able to go into a bit more of a detailed summary here. So you can see from the annotations on the right, we need to provide some evidence. They haven't provided any evidence from the text. We need to include some more detailed inferences to show that we can read and make implicit or make interpretations from implicit material. And we could also include perhaps a connective or the word both to make the examiner see that we are clearly comparing, and we can do that. So that would get you about 2, let's say, out of 8. If you're going to push it a little bit more, then you might end up saying something like this, and I've color coded it so you can see red for source A and purple for source B. Each place is presented differently. In source A, few people had heard of Aberfan, and it has a decaying railway with a general coating of grime on roofs and gardens, suggesting that the village is isolated and has been neglected. However, London in source B is colossal, ceaselessly smoking and streaming, implying that it's constantly working and busy city with lots of industry and thriving with workers, so much so that the city seems never to rest. So this would, I think, get you, either 3 out of 8, possibly 4 out of 8. So it's coming now kind of to half marks. They have clearly quoted much better than the first example. They have used the connective however, so they have made that comparison very clear. There is inference, but again, I think it could be developed even more than this as well. There are other things that you could say based on what we read. So this would kind of get you, I think, 3 or 4 out of 8 perhaps. So we're edging into the kind of the grade 3, grade 4 kind of boundary here. Finally, if you're going to push it even further, and I do want to remind you that you do only have 10 minutes for this task, so you have to be realistic about what you can do in the time. But if you are really in the zone and you think you've really got to grips with what you're being told, then you might impress yourself and amaze yourself and end up writing something a bit longer like this. Both extracts present many differences regarding the places they describe. In source A, few people had heard of Aberfan, and it has a decaying railway with a general coating of grime on roofs and gardens, suggesting that the village is isolated and has been neglected since the mining industry is in decline. If the railway is decaying, it means there aren't many trains or people around to use them. It also suggests that Aberfan is polluted and filthy from all the coal. This is a village that got its identity from mining, but has now been forgotten. However, London in source B is colossal, ceaselessly smoking and streaming, with vast warehouses, implying that it's a constantly working and busy city with lots of industry and thriving with workers, so much so that the city never seems to rest. The fact that homes are well built in London infers that the living conditions are better and cleaner than in Aberfan, although the river is muddy from all the boats shipping goods or waste products from warehouses rather than from coal. In short, Aberfan is a small and isolated mining village with a dying industry and population, whereas London is constantly busy and full of work. So again, you can see I've colour-coded to show red for source A and purple for source B. We've got the connective however in there. They also start with the word both, which again, from the get-go, shows a comparison. The quotes are there. They're not long quotes. They're quite sharp, precise quotes. Again, you shouldn't be spending too long copying out large quotes. It wastes time. But what's perhaps the most impressive thing from this response is that the inference is much more detailed and developed. There is a real sense here that the student has understood what each setting is like. So this would probably now get you towards the top of the mark scheme, perhaps 7, if not 8 out of 8, I think. So much more confident. Okay, so that is the summary question using the London and Aberfan exemplar paper from many years ago now. Again, just want to repeat, be realistic, it is a 10-minute task, and also don't get confused about the word summary. Replace the word summary with the word explain. You are explaining to the examiner, in this case, why Aberfan is different to London. So the place where you write your answer is where you are explaining those differences. Okay, so remember quotes, connective, and also try to develop some detailed inferences.